Okay, so this is my sort of dissenting review of The Irishman by Martin Scorsese, released by Netflix in 2019. It was released theatrically. I didn't catch it in theaters, so just keep that in mind. I saw it, like I think most people, laptop or with a television. So, I may not be giving it full justice. And again, I'm gonna preemptively say I think it's a 6 out of 10. I think it's a good film. I would recommend it. I don't think it's too long. I think it's fine for its length, but I think it's just a good picture. It's not outstanding. I think even within a lot of his own films, and I don't like them. I don't like Goodfellas or Casino. I don't think they're really great films, but I do think they're far better. They're more energetic, and I also think they're more honest about what they're trying to say about the gangster lifestyle. This one seems very derivative, superficial. It's untrue to the source. The source book by Brandt is much more honest about Frank and how amoral and evil he is. And again, I understand this isn't a total adaptation of the book, but it just felt not as honest or coherent as the source novel. I'm sorry, source journalist book, or as good as some of his other work. Okay, so let me get to I think some bad criticisms. The length. The length is huge, but again, I'm not intimidated by length, whether it's JFK, Malcolm X, Eyes Wide Shut. Length is fine. The question is, what is the filmmaker doing with the length? And here the problem is, I think he's just being extremely self-indulgent. I will defend certain parts of it. For instance, we see Frank doing very repetitive actions over and over again. One shot he keeps doing over and over is him dumping a gun in a river. I mean, I have no problem with that. You have to set up a rhythm for the character because it took a long time for him to join the mafia. So you're going to have to take some time to establish the trust he builds with Pesci's Russell and some of the other characters. But after a certain point, you're clearly just showing things over and over and over to try to get this kind of Kubrickian feel for like, oh, wow, this is so boring or so repetitive. And it's like, I've seen those films. You've done those films already. You've done this with Goodfellas. You did this before with Casino. Yes, the repetitiveness and sheer futility of this lifestyle. You did this already. Let's move on. So the length is not the issue, except that it's not adding very much to the film. It's just there. So I don't give points off for it, but I don't think we should just congratulate him for like, oh, he's doing a 3.5 hour film. People do those all the time. Why should you be getting enormous amounts of praise just for the length? That makes no sense. Okay, another bad criticism, which is that it lacks humor. This is true. It's not Goodfellas. The jokes in Goodfellas are very explicit. They're very bawdy. There's a lot of profanity. The jokes here are a little bit more subtle. There's a lot of visual puns, which I appreciated. There's a little more subtlety. For instance, Pacino as Hoffa has this really silly joke about stabbing versus getting shot and how that works. He also gets in this ridiculous fight with people from time to time. I thought those were played out very funny. It's subtle. It's not like just saying you should laugh here. So some of the humor is very dry. So if you wanted a more like overt style with like Wolf of Wall Street, it'll be disappointing. But if you're okay with dry humor, I think it did a good job overall. Finally, there's a controversy over Anna Paquin, how she's really not in the film. She's only in for a couple of scenes. She almost has no lines. She gives a couple looks, and that's about it. Now, I have to say, I think she did actually a very great performance for what she's supposed to do. The whole film is about how Frank is alienated from his family, so by definition, you're not going to see a lot of his family. You only see a couple of scenes with him with his family, and it's very short. So I thought it was overall fine. I didn't suspect any sexism or misogyny or anti-feminism. That's not to say those aren't issues with Scorsese. They probably are, but I don't think so in this film. I think for the most part, the female characters come off pretty good compared to the male characters. And I do agree that Anna Paquin is underutilized or misused, but this is a bigger issue of her star power and how, she's done some good work with X-Men films and other roles. But yeah, I mean, she's just playing the role that Scorsese constructed for her. Within those limits, I think she did a pretty good job, but I definitely wish there was more, but he chose to tell a certain story. I'm judging by the story he tells. So what is the story? And this is, I think, the major flaw with this film is it takes this huge, moralizing, endlessly condemning attitude towards the gangster lifestyle. And he even does this visual thing to show over and over and over again how people are going to get shot, they're going to get killed, they're going to die on this day, they're going to die on that day. And it's like, okay, I get it. It's fine. I understand that you take a stance against gangsterism. But there are just two flaws. One, this is not a consistent attitude. If you look at Goodfellas, Mean Streets, Casino, and other films, he does not take a condemning attitude. It's both glorifying as well as condemning this lifestyle. So it's not consistent with his other canon. So it just feels very convenient that now he's becoming very old. He may die soon. So now he's going to take a condemning attitude. So I found that really inconsistent. Another thing is he has this very kind of preachy attitude, like he's giving us a history lesson, like, you kids, you guys don't know Hoffa, you don't know anything about history, you don't know anything about the past. He even inserts this very explicitly, like there's this nurse and Frank goes to her saying, yeah, this is Jimmy Hoffa, I have a photo of him, do you know who he is? And she's like, I don't really know who he is. And it's like, okay, I get it, and I have no problem with the message, but directed towards somebody like me, it's incredibly insulted. I've read hundreds of history books. I've seen hundreds of films. I know history. I know modern history. I know ancient history. I have a degree in history. So his attitude, both moralistically in terms of gangsterism in American history, I found really, after a while, insulting and very annoying. Also, I think that's the major problem with the film. It's not really about Frank or Hoffa at all. It just seems like he wants to have a post-war history where he's going to, explore Castro, the Kennedy assassination, unions, big business. That's fine. But you called it The Irishman. It seems like it's set up as a biopic, but clearly the biopic formula is not what interests him. So he's just using Frank as a vessel to tell this other story. Well, tell that other story. But if you're going to tell the Hoffa story, tell the Hoffa story or tell the Frank story. It just seems like this is just an occasion to tell another story and sort of fool the audience. And I think after a while, it's like, okay, you're not being honest with the audience as to what you're really up to. Now, good parts, I think there's a lot. Technically speaking, it's great. It looks amazing. Preto as cinematographer is amazing. He did good work with Oliver Stone, Ong Lee, Inarritu, and even with Scorsese, though I think his last film, Silence, looked horrific. It looked terrible. I was bored. It was visually uninteresting. It was uninspired. So I think the budget did a lot to allow them to visually show a good deal with The Irishman. The costumes are amazing. Locations are great. I think the minor performances are standout. Jesse Plemons as Chucky is pretty good. There's an actor who does Sally Bugs. I really liked him. I thought he did an excellent job. And I think, again, the main performances are fine, but they're not outstanding. They're just good. There's a much, much better Hoffa film called Hoffa by Danny DeVito. I think Jack Nicholson's Hoffa is much more believable and powerful as Pacino. And I understand Pacino's playing more the family man and showing us that humanistic side of Hoffa. And those parts are fine, but this is a very incomplete picture of Hoffa. And I think DeVito's Hoffa in 1992 is much, much better in terms of giving us the person. And the Nicholson performance is much more well-rounded and much more powerful. Still, overall, a good film. Again, like I said, 6 out of 10. I would recommend it. I don't think it's too boring, but again, except for some good technical details here and there about cinematography or costumes, it's not that good. The music is just okay. It even steals moments from Goodfellas, which, again, I found really annoying. And if you really know Scorsese films, you're like, he's really just quoting himself a lot of times, and that, after a while, it's like, okay, this is a good film, but you're not really saying too much that is new. But again, there's a lot of impressiveness with directing such a huge cast, so many extras. So again, there's something amazing about the sheer scope of the film, and obviously you cannot fault him as a director in that respect. Managing a crew of that size is astonishing for somebody his age. But again, just looking at the film as a film, it's fine. But calling it one of the best films of 2019 is a lie. It just is not true. Saying it's one of the best theatrical, at least, is ridiculous. There are just way stronger films at the theatrical level, even way stronger films at Netflix. I would give Marriage Story, which I don't think is a great film, 7 out of 10 easily. It's much more inventive, much more clever, and much more cohesive. This just feels like people are really feeling sorry because he's getting very old. He may die soon, and they just want to say, well, this is a great classical director and he's giving us another great classical film. This is not a great classical film. This is at best a middling effort by a good director who is, I will grant him, he's being stylistically constrained. I did appreciate that. He's not being too overindulgent, except in a few places with the music or with dolly shots or tracking shots. But in places, yeah, the tracking shots are annoying, and he's not doing it very well. Paul Thomas Anderson, Stanley Kubrick, I can name tons of directors that do much better tracking shots. You're just showing off the budget, you're showing off the locations, which is your prerogative, but it's not path-breaking, it's not great, it's not excellent, it's good, it's fine. It's amazing that you have this access to the budget and you're able to use it effectively, but many other directors could have done the same thing. So overall, a good film. You can even defend it as a great film, but one of the best of the year, or even one of the best of the decade, not by a long shot. I could easily name tons of films within the genre which are much better. De Palma's Untouchables, De Palma's Scarface, Stanley Kubrick's The Killing. Again, there are just much better films on the subject, whether by the mob or gangsters, or even the JFK aspect. Oliver Stone's JFK, he already covered the Kennedy assassination much more thoroughly, and he did have the mob connection in that film as well. So whether you're looking at it as a history film, or as a biopic, or just a Hoffa film, again, the DeVito film, the Oliver Stone film, Kubrick, De Palma, I mean, even ironically, Scorsese have done much better films about the subject matter, even these particular topics. So a good film, but I do feel like critics have clearly just not done their diligence, and I understand with the younger critics, they're just not very good at film history, so they don't even remember Hoffa. But I feel really annoyed that the older film critics didn't even bother noting that, oh wait, we already have a film on Hoffa. I think that's an obligation as a critic. Like, let's be honest. If Hoffa is a better film, and it is, then say it's a better film, and it is a better film. Hoffa, I would highly recommend. The Irishman, I would recommend, but weekly. It's a good film, but not a necessary film. Stronger Scorsese films you want to look at, fine, but this is at best a middling effort. Good, but not great. Solid performances and a solid film, but nothing special, and certainly not one of the best of the year, much less best of the decade. I think those are incredibly exaggerated judgments on a rather solid, but just at the end of the day, okay film by a very good director, but certainly not one of the greatest, or even one of the greatest of all time. Just in my humble opinion. So, The Irishman, recommended, but Hoffa, much more recommended than that. Thanks.